Final Fantasy was a pretty big part of my childhood and adolescence. It was my favorite series for a while, and while it doesn't rank quite so high for me anymore, I still feel very fondly towards the series. I'm certainly in the majority in that most of my interaction with the series was through Final Fantasy VII, but I have played several other games in the series. Still, 7 is what drew me in, and it's the one I tended to focus on the most. So I've been following the remake for quite a while. There are plenty of opinions on the first part on both sides, and maybe I'll talk about that more sometime, but it's pretty clear that the main purpose of the game was to set up the idea that the remake timeline will not follow exactly the original timeline. There will obviously be similarities, but a very big portion of that game was devoted to creating an entity designed to try to uphold the canon of the original and then literally destroying that entity at the end. They couldn't have made it much more obvious than that. And naturally, that brought up hope on one side and concern on the other about the most well-known scene in Final Fantasy VII. And since it's been confirmed that the second game will end right around the end of Disc 1, which is at the Forgotten Capital, it made me want to ask this question. Does Aerith have to die? Well, no, she doesn't, obviously. She doesn't have to do anything. Square can do whatever they want with the game, but the question is more so, should Aerith die? Does the game lose its meaning if she lives? I know when this is brought up, there are typically two sides. The, oh my gosh, please don't kill my favorite fictional character side, and the, if you let Aerith live, you're literally destroying the entire point of the first game. Well, I'm obviously not the final say, but I do find both of these viewpoints pretty flawed. I recently replayed Final Fantasy VII and 100%ed it just to do research for this video. Not that I had to 100% it just to do research, but I had never done it before and I felt like doing it. I had played through the game and finished it normally a long time ago, but I wanted to have an updated viewpoint on everything before I made this video. And I think a lot of us have played this game a long time ago. We probably knew about Aerith's death going in, and we kind of figured that there was a grand reason for it, and as we played through the game and eventually finished it, we kind of assigned a reason for her death in our heads. Most commonly, it was this idea that her death was needed to establish or strengthen the theme of the game. I remember my particular reasoning was the idea that I thought that even after people were gone, they could still have an impact on our lives and the world. I thought for sure I had read an interview one time that detailed this, but I now can't find that interview if it ever existed in the first place. Perhaps I had read that Yoshinori Kitase, the director, was going through the loss of his mother at the time, and I had assigned it this meaning under the assumption that this was the intent. And then later my brain fabricated the interview as part of a way to support what I had believed. I don't know. Maybe we all have false memory stuff like Cloud. Though, probably not as severe. What is the reason for Aerith's death, though? Is there a reason? Now, I know the knee-jerk reaction to that is anger, especially from anyone who loves this game, because asserting that her death has no meaning is to say that the game is poorly written, right? Well, not necessarily, and it's actually not an assertion. In the May 2003 edition of Edge magazine, Kitase talked about Final Fantasy VII and briefly spoke about Aerith. It was a bit difficult to find an official source for this outside of just ordering the magazine on Amazon, but you have to understand. I am very broke. Luckily, the article was transcribed by a user named Tulisti on the site ff7citadel.com. I'll leave the link in the description. Big thanks to them. I'll quote the article now. With the plot, I wanted people to feel something intense, to understand something. Back at the time we were designing the game, I was frustrated with the perennial dramatic cliché where the protagonist loves someone very much and has to sacrifice himself and die in dramatic fashion in order to express that love. We found this was the case in both games and movies, both Eastern and Western. But I wanted to say something different, something realistic. I mean, Is it right to set such an example to people? Kitase-san is adamant that cultural art puts too high a value on the dramatically meaningful death. In the real world, things are very different. You just need to look around you. Nobody wants to die that way. People die of disease and accident. Death comes suddenly, and there is no notion of good or bad. It leaves not a dramatic feeling, but great emptiness. When you lose someone you loved very much, you feel this big empty space and think, if I had known this was coming, I would have done things differently. These are the feelings I wanted to arouse in the players with Aerith's death, relatively early in the game. Feelings of reality, and not Hollywood. Ironically, in searching for the meaning to her death, maybe we all missed the meaning, because the real meaning is that it's meaningless. The greatest meaning it has in the context of the game is that Sephiroth kills the person that he considers the greatest threat to him, but it doesn't somehow enrich the narrative. And it's true. I actually felt this while playing. There are times when the party reflects on Aerith's death, but it doesn't tie back to the narrative in some kind of grand, meaningful way. Yes, she died activating Holy, but she didn't have to die to do this. She just did. They just chose for her to die doing this. She didn't trade her life to cast Holy. She just casted Holy and then died. When thinking about FF7 in hindsight, you just accept that Aerith has to die. That's just how it's supposed to be. But in replaying the game to research this one question, I kept asking myself, why did she die? Why did she have to die? What was the point? Is it really just bad writing that it didn't really tie back in anything? Or maybe they left out whatever they were going to tie it back into? But after reading this, I see what they were going for. Those are the questions you're supposed to be asking. Why? Why did it happen? Why did it have to happen? It's so meaningless and unfair. And it is. It's portraying feelings of reality, not Hollywood. Aerith didn't pray on that altar with the intent to die. She didn't have to die to activate Holy. Her death didn't force the characters to develop. Her death didn't serve any grander purpose in the game other than just her death. It doesn't serve some grand purpose. It's just something that happens. It's something that happens and it sucks. And it just leaves you feeling empty. It's realistic like that. I've recently experienced the loss of someone very close to me, and I'm sure many of us can relate to that. Death is unfair and indiscriminate, and rarely is there some grander reason to why somebody dies. It just happens, and it sucks, and you just have to move on, even though you don't want to. And that way, Aerith's death is very realistic. While doing further research for this video on the internet, I happened across a fandom article titled, "Did Aerith Have to Die? Great minds think alike." In this article, Drakey C., its author, very comprehensively describes the event and its purpose, and concludes that meaninglessness is the meaning. To quote the article, "Perhaps the real power behind Aerith's death is that there was no meaning to it. The story did not need her to die, but the developers chose to have her die for no reason, because they wished to do so. As Kitase said, death in the real world is different. There is no meaning to it beyond the fact that it happens when you least expect it. Even on a meta level, this happened with Aerith. The developers did not need to kill her, but they did. And try as we might to find meaning in it, and while I may protest it was unnecessary, there is one irrefutable fact. It happened. And it cannot be changed. It wasn't fair, and it didn't improve the story. But how often is death in real life either of those things?" Incredibly good analysis, almost makes this video redundant. I'll leave it in the description, and I strongly urge you to check it out if you're interested. It's expertly written and researched. One key difference, though, is that this article was published in 2016 and looked backwards. Did Aerith have to die? This video is looking forward to her birth. Does Aerith have to die? The short answer is no. Aerith never had to die. The meaninglessness of her death is what ultimately impacted so many people. But as Drakey C so well points out, it's very easy to imagine a scenario where Aerith survives, and it impacts very little about the game. Is that it then? Well, it should be pointed out that Aerith's death was a huge moment in video game history. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. Many people point to it as one of the most defining video game moments ever, and I honestly struggle to think of any narrative moment in any video game that's as famous as it. Regardless if the scene has meaning or not, regardless if she has to die, it is still one of the most iconic scenes from any video game ever made. If they intend to keep Aerith alive, they're going to have a very tall order trying to get any scene that even comes close to matching the amount of emotional reaction that scene got. It does go both ways, though. Because if they just kill Aerith like everyone expects, some tears will be shed, but no one's going to be surprised. Everyone knows what happens. You're not going to surprise anyone by killing Aerith. Even if they changed it so that Cloud killed her, like he almost does in the original, that would still be mild shock at most compared to the tremendous reaction her death in the original caused. So, maybe there's no winning. Either you change it and you get one camp of people who are enraged that you aren't preserving the integrity of the original, and you have to make up for the gap that her death leaves. Or you just keep it the same and everyone just kind of nods their head and goes, "Ah, it's a darn shame," and then moves on. Theoretically, it seems impossible for the climax of Rebirth to live up to Aerith's death, no matter which route they take. That's most of the topic covered. Her death in the original had no meaning, and that was its meaning. She does not have to die. She never had to die. But no matter which route they take, they're going to have a very hard time living up to that scene in the original. So now, how about some speculation? What if Aerith is already dead in the remake? Now, this doesn't make very much sense, does it? Well, I also recently replayed the remake. Ironically, I was in the middle of replaying it when they dropped the Rebirth trailer. And that trailer really made me start to think about some things. In the trailer, it shows Sephiroth cutting down Tifa during the Nibelheim incident, and he says this:
"You know that I killed her. So, who is she?"
Naturally, this caused a lot of people to speculate about what this may mean for Tifa, but I'm wondering if the trailer is intentionally misdirecting us. He did the same thing to Tifa in the original, and she was fine thanks to Zangan. Maybe this means they're changing things with Tifa. Maybe it's just Sephiroth trying to mess with Cloud's head. He does love doing that. Or maybe he's referring to the one character we know for a fact Sephiroth did kill. What if he's talking about Aerith in this line? While replaying the remake, I noticed some oddities that I didn't really notice the first time around, especially revolving around Aerith. In Remake, Cloud has these flashes that give him flashbacks or mess with his mind. Nothing new there. But he also gets flashes to events that haven't happened yet, including Aerith's death. And that's flashed to more than once. In one instance, Cloud even sheds a tear, as if remembering the instance and the heavy emotional toll it took on him. But remembering? How can you remember if it hasn't happened yet? Maybe he's experiencing this emotion as part of this precognition, but since when can Cloud see into the future? Is it possible that Aerith's death is somehow the same as the other flashes? That somehow it's happened in the past? Now, it should be noted that the Whispers do show the party flashes of the original timeline during the final battle with them. It's a little confusing because I always thought that they did this to stop the party from beating them up, but they also show them things about, like, Aerith's death and the meteor coming towards Earth. It's like, whoa, guys, calm down. Kind of confusing. It's like, whoa, guys, if you don't kill me, then this friend that you really care about will die. Aren't we best friends now? But the point is that the whispers aren't part of these moments. Nothing prompts him to have these visions, not Aerith and not the whispers. So it seems to be the same as his other flashes, which mainly show the past. Adding on to this, Aerith seems very knowledgeable in the remake. Maybe too knowledgeable. She seems to know things that she shouldn't know yet, and she makes multiple allusions to the idea that she might not be here for very much longer, obviously alluding to the idea of her death. I checked around for specific instances of this happening, and Aerith's page on the Final Fantasy Wiki cites some examples. Most notably that she knows about Marlene prior to being told about her, and she knows Barrett's identity before ever meeting him. Wow, that really supports my theory. Except, I fact-checked these, and they're not entirely accurate. Tifa does mention Marlene in the train graveyard right in front of Aerith, so the idea that Aerith had no idea who Marlene was, or shouldn't have known who she was, isn't entirely accurate.
A girl? Marlene? Marlene, what are you? We can't waste any more time here.
It's true Tifa isn't super specific about who Marlene is in this instance, but it's not that wild of a leap to imagine that Aerith could put two and two together after seeing how panicked Tifa was at the idea that Marlene was in danger. Perhaps it is a lot to assume that Aerith would know right away that Tifa was going to ask her to help Marlene, but it's within the realm of plausibility. And though Aerith hadn't met Barrett, Cloud did mention him by name shortly before Aerith met Marlene, so it's also not that much of a stretch to assume that she might assume that this is Marlene's father.
They're really gonna drop the plate.
They won't if Barrett and the others have anything to say about it.
It also points out the Aerith version of the Chapter 14 resolution scene, which I want to talk about as well. In this scene, Aerith prays in a very obvious reference to her death scene in the original, while ominously stating,
Everyone dies eventually.
the foreshadowing here is incredibly obvious. It seems like she knows what's going to happen, but it can be argued that this is just for the audience's benefit and that Aerith doesn't know it, she just happens to act the same way while also stating very ominously about death. Kind of a stretch, but it's within the realm of plausibility. But she continues to say,
But whatever happens, you can't fall in love with me. Even if you think you have, it's not real.
now, obviously she's saying this because she belongs with Zack. I don't need to tell you guys that. You all know that. But that's beside the point. But the question then becomes, what isn't real? Is it Cloud or is it Aerith? Well, it could really be either. The personality Cloud displays during Disc 1 is largely fake. This idealized version of this hardened ex-soldier, which his brain had morphed him into after all the emotional trauma he went through, to put it lightly. Aerith never meets the real Cloud, which I believe she references in her dream conversation with Cloud after the Temple of the Ancients, if her affection is high enough. Not that I would know because I obviously dated Barrett. That's all well and good, but it's strange for her to say that his hypothetical feelings aren't real if he's the one being fake. After all, isn't it the other way around? Aerith has an interest in him because he reminds her of Zack, but this isn't who Cloud really is, so isn't it her feelings that aren't real? If Cloud had feelings for Aerith, there's no reason that those feelings wouldn't be real unless she was fake somehow, right? But maybe I'm just reading too much into the wording. It's particularly suspicious that at the end of this sequence, she dissolves into what appears to be the life stream. But it is a dream. And as much as I want to make a big fuss about her transmitting her consciousness into his dream, this is something that appears to happen in the original as well. Nebula Cetra powers, I guess. So ultimately, the resolution scene isn't exactly concrete either. There are two other things I want to talk about from the remake, the first of which I'm not sure is connected, but it was something I noticed that was kind of weird. In two different instances, Aerith causes these weird flashes that are similar to what happens when Cloud has his weird brain flashes. And in both instances, it seems to suddenly calm the other person down. First, she does this with Marlene, and then second with Nanaki, or Red 13.
What? You want to go?
Stop. This child's a friend.
I don't exactly know what's going on here, and I don't really have a strong way to tie it back into my theory, but I just wanted to let people know about it. It's a little weird. The last thing is the somewhat strange fact that she can talk to and understand ghosts, which she does in the train graveyard. And yes, I know, okay, alright, before you start yelling at me, I know the Cetra can hear the voices of the planet, and the planet is where the dead people go after they die. So, understanding ghosts makes sense, right? Well, Aerith has never really been able to understand the voices from the planet that clearly, if ever at all. She hears them, but she can't understand them. Whereas with the ghosts in the train graveyard, she communicates with them perfectly. I guess it's similar because she has moments where she doesn't understand fully, but she does talk to them and hear exactly what they're saying, which isn't really the case with hearing the voices from the planet. Could that be because she's a ghost too? I don't know. This whole thing is more so to give food for thought rather than a concrete theory I feel really strong about. I really thought that this theory was a cool idea, and I was hoping to have a big mountain of evidence to present to say, yeah, maybe this is where they're going. But unfortunately, I actually did the research, and a lot of it doesn't really support the claim, or at least it doesn't support it that strongly. There are a few things you can look at to say, maybe that's what they're doing, but there's not really enough strong evidence to really hang your hat on it, you know? The biggest thing is that Cloud has flashes to Aerith's death, which would imply that it occurs in the past, but who really knows? Although the last thing I want to point out is the fact that the title of the next game is Rebirth. This could mean nothing. This could just be a fancy way of saying remake, or it could be referring to the fact that someone will be reborn in the game. And it doesn't really apply to Sephiroth because he doesn't get reborn until Disc 2, and Genova, doesn't really make sense either. If the title Rebirth is actually referring to the rebirth of a person, it would have to be either Zack or Aerith, the only two characters who have died and who people actually care about. Given that Zack has a rather prominent part in the game, even to the point that he's part of the key art alongside Cloud and Sephiroth, it's easy to assume that this might be him. But it could also be Aerith, if this wild theory has any grounds to it at all. Because the only kind of emotional reaction I could think of that would even come close to the original is if, rather than killing Aerith at the Forgotten Capital, they revived her. Although, it would still feel very cheap to a lot of people I know, so it's hard to say. Needless to say, it would have to be explained well, though, because while I think that there is some breadcrumbs that could lead to the idea that Aerith has been dead the whole time, there's not really enough there right now, so we'll just see. So there you have it. My relatively comprehensive thoughts about the title question, as well as my outlandish theory about where Rebirth could be going. We can all look back on this after Rebirth comes out and think, wow, that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, especially now in hindsight and with context. I'm unsubscribing. But if you did enjoy the video, I would appreciate it if you would give it a like. I don't know if it does anything, but it does make me feel better about the effort I put in. And hey, subscribe if you feel like it. But more importantly than either of those things, genuinely, I hope you have a fantastic day. Go try to do something productive with your life. I will try to do the same.